Well, friends, your love and your beautiful faces have so affected me since yesterday that I feel moved to pray to Baha'u'llah that this community may become a jewel in the whole Baha'i world, really, because you are jewels. I mentioned yesterday or day before how much the early believers at the time of Baha'u'llah would have longed to see one of you who have embraced his faith in the Western world, especially in all these remote areas. And I know that your country has a great destiny. Someone was telling us at the National Assembly meeting here that the people of this country, and probably Ireland, are the people who will, the countries who will bring great numbers into the faith in the Western world. And I hope very much that this will happen. You know, the powers of earth and heaven are working for us to promote the faith, provided we rise and provided we turn to Baha'u'llah. Once we turn to ourselves, then nothing will happen. Once you rely on yourself, nothing will happen. But if you turn to him and rely on him and bring him with you, then all kinds of things will happen. And time is short, really. The world is set for great upheavals and sufferings, which will encompass mankind. And during this short period of time, we have to prepare ourselves for the time that great numbers are going to knock on our doors in the middle of night and tell us, now we know what you were saying. Please tell us what should we do. We have to prepare ourselves for that day, because that day will come. You know, the world conditions will deteriorate. There is no doubt about it. This is what Baha'u'llah has said over 100 years ago. Baha'u'llah said that if his believers, those of his time, who had recognized him, if they had carried out his teachings with absolute sincerity and faithfulness, then the whole world, the great majority of the world, would have recognized Baha'u'llah in his day. But this did not happen. And so now we have to bear the consequences of mankind's failure to recognize him. And the leaders of the world, the message of Baha'u'llah fell on deaf ears when they received it. All of these consequences will result in the breaking up of this old order. And day by day, as Baha'u'llah has mentioned, day by day, the conditions will become worse. It's not something which will become worse month by month, but day by day. That today will be worse than yesterday. And this is our experience also. We can see it with our own eyes. From every point of view. Morally, spiritually, socially, economically, politically. Society will break up, and is breaking up at a terrific speed, until what Baha'u'llah has said will become fulfilled. And then he said that suddenly, he uses the word suddenly. Suddenly that will happen which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. That is a tremendous upheaval which will face us all. And from what Shoghi Effendi has written, it's not going to be a small thing. The limbs of mankind, the whole human society will quake. And then Baha'u'llah gives us the vision of what happens after that. Immediately after that. And not after that, but immediately after. Because he says, then and only then. Then and only then. I paraphrase his words, will the divine standard be unfurled, and the nightingales will warble their melodies, which means there and only then the cause of God will be widespread over the world. It will be proclaimed and great numbers will come into the faith. We have to prepare ourselves for that day. And our institutions, which we are building today, are going to be those institutions which are going to guide humanity. As torches, he says, these will become beacons of light, which will guide humanity at the time of its greatest peril. Now, we are not going to go into this subject now. I didn't mean to talk about this particular aspect. And we know that the institutions of the faith, the cause of God, is protected in all these calamities and sufferings which are to happen. And I believe, and Shoghi Effendi has in fact indicated these things, I believe very firmly that if any believer dedicates himself fully to the progress of the cause, for the advancements of the faith, God will protect him. I'm not saying that we should now go and teach the faith so that we may save our neck in the future difficulties. This is not at all the right motive. Not, far from it. I'm saying this. God will protect the believers so that those who are steadfast in the cause and dedicate yourself. You know, the early believers that I met when I was young, if I tell you this, you may not believe this. They had the power of life and death in their own hands. They had reached to such powers. God had given them such powers that they had the power of life and death. And they used it to protect, to propagate the faith, to enlarge its institutions and its society, communities. This is because they had faith. If you have faith to that extent that we have faith, our powers will be to that extent of your faith. And Baha'u'llah mentions those who have been, who have become detached from the things of this world. And when you become detached, you know, it means that you will become attached to Baha'u'llah. That's the meaning of it, really. The only barrier we have between us and Baha'u'llah is our attachment to the things of this world. Once we become detached from it, then we will find that the powers of Baha'u'llah will descend upon us. And this is when things will happen. Well, friends, I don't want to talk about this subject at all, but as I said, the marvelous spirit which is created in this meeting, I feel it from yourselves, from you people. And I know that when I return back, I shall be very much uplifted by having met you and having come to your presence. I want to continue the subject we were discussing yesterday. Now, I'm not going to repeat what I have said yesterday, but I feel that those of you who are here may be able to follow the thread of the discussions. And those of you who were not here, probably you have to bear with me somehow. You remember the 2 points which so far we discussed. And for the soul to grow and to develop and to become closer to Baha'u'llah, for the spirit of faith, when we talked about the spirit of faith, to grow day by day, so that our faith becomes stronger day by day, stronger. So that Baha'u'llah's words become fulfilled when he expects of us that our tomorrow is better than our today. And we pointed out one or two points that we could help ourselves. And this was the way that Baha'u'llah himself had shown us. We talked about the saying of obligatory prayers, the significance of it. We said how much the saying of the obligatory prayer makes the soul humble. Really, when you read it carefully and in the presence of God, in the privacy of your own chamber, you read that, and you see how humble we become. We become like that drop, which I was mentioning yesterday, seeing the ocean. And then great powers can descend on the soul. And then when we read the writings of Baha'u'llah, and we talked about what the writings consisted of, so different from prayers, then great powers again will come. But that's not enough. You know, the story of religion is the story of love. When you say you are a Baha'i, you means that we are in love with Baha'u'llah. This is the meaning of it. It's a love story. It's not a story of knowledge. Forget about knowledge. Knowledge is a problem, quite frankly. And we probably talk about this. I'll make sure that I'll talk about this sometime today to you. But love for God, love for Baha'u'llah. We are created to be the lovers. You know, this is the function of man, is to be a lover. And to the extent that we are a lover, to that extent we can enjoy life and we can enjoy living in accordance with the teachings. Now, to be a Baha'i means you are a lover of Baha'u'llah. And of course, loving is a relative term. It varies from person to person. We are at different levels here. When you love somebody, the sign of love, a real love, is that you are ready and willing and really longing to do what your beloved asks you to do. Isn't that right? This is a true love I'm talking about. I'm not talking of superficial love that somebody may think he has for somebody else. You know, the real love. When you have a real love, you don't want anything for yourself. You realize this? And if you ever want anything for yourself, it means that you are not in love with that person. Now, if you say, oh yes, I love this person because, he's very rich and he's got the cars and houses and business, I love him. This is not love, this is selfishness, you see? But a real love is when you don't want anything for yourself, that you want everything for your beloved. Now here we come to a very important point. When we become a Baha'i, and when we love Baha'u'llah, we want to do everything he has asked us to do, to carry out his teachings. And this is a very important point. If I say I love him, but I don't carry out his teachings, then it means it's no use. I read the writings, what's the use of it? I say my prayers, but I don't obey Baha'u'llah. You see how these things are related together? How one follows the other? You remember yesterday I was telling you it's something like you have to close all the switches which are in series, one after the other, and if one of them is open, no current can go through. You have to close all the switches. Now this is it. We have to be willing and ready and joyous and longing to carry out his teachings. And his teachings is not purely, and his laws, the laws that he has given to us. Now in the Western world, we don't have many laws. Our laws are very few that Baha'u'llah has now given to us. The time will come in the future that we have to carry out more laws, which he has enjoined upon us. But the laws that he has given to us are so few. I mean, I will count them for you. We can count it with the fingers of your hand. Do you know what the first law of Baha'u'llah is, which we are asked to carry out? The most important of these laws? It's a law. And law has precedence over anything else. If there is a law, and if there is a teaching or a saying, the preference comes to the law of Baha'u'llah. I mentioned yesterday, if there was a choice between reading the writings of Baha'u'llah and saying the obligatory prayers, we say the obligatory prayers because it's the law of Baha'u'llah. Now, the first and the most important law of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers and fasting. It's required of us. And he mentions, Abdul Baha also mentions, that if we do not do that, we will not be able to get close to him. There is a barrier already. And we have to make this a habit. Let us, all of us here, as our chairman was saying, really determine and try it. I would suggest, and this is, of course, I'm mentioning this to the new Baha'is, because the older Baha'is are familiar with this. But I'm mentioning this to newer Baha'is. Let us try this for 3 months. Do it regularly. And regularly read the writings, and then you forget about it. Just remember it for 3 months. That's enough. Then forget about it. All will work out then. You will find it becomes a beautiful picture. You try it. You try it and see how one's life will change. Now, yes, we must, just reading the laws of Baha'u'llah, I was talking about. The fasting, obligatory prayers, the law of marriage, Baha'i marriage, I'm sure you're all familiar with. The law of prohibition of the drinking of alcohol is one of the laws of Baha'u'llah, which is binding on us. It is time that now, in the Western world, we are able, as Baha'is, and especially the young Baha'is, to stand erect, well-oriented, strong people who will stand up in the public and say, I will not drink because Baha'u'llah has forbidden it. And the same thing applies to the taking of drugs. These are the things we have to be frank with people who become Baha'is and tell them this. They have every right to know this. And then the other one is the question of sexual relations outside marriage. It's forbidden by Baha'u'llah. Outside marriage, before and after. Marriage, he has enjoined upon us. And it is not compulsory, but it's a marvelous thing. When I was about 10 or 12 years ago in Ireland, we had about 150, 200 people became Baha'is in one town. Young people. Young men and young women. They became beautiful Baha'is, strong Baha'is. And they all scattered. We asked them to scatter throughout the country. And now they are the people who have built up the foundations of of all the communities we have there. We have now in the south of Ireland 20 local assemblies. And these people have become the foundations of these assemblies. They have pioneered. All of them spread around. And it's very beautiful. You see, God has not forbidden, has not withheld from us all the pleasures of the world. You must not think that Baha'u'llah has come to stop us having pleasure. All the pleasures of this world, you can enjoy it, and it is for you, but you have to do it in the right way. Baha'u'llah mentions the idea of detachment is not to become a poor man and a mendicant or live an ascetic life. You can, he said, have all the good things of this world. He said, in fact, all the good things of this world, in one of his tablets, he mentions all the good things of this world is created for the loved ones of God. It's all created for you. But he says, do not become attached to them. Do not make them to rule you. to rule over you, but you can have them. He says, if you can eat in vessels of gold, eat vessels of gold. But don't become attached to them. Don't let them become your master. So you see, the idea of detachment is so different from what people think. When you say detach yourself from the things of this world, some people think now this means you have to become careless, you have to give up the world. This is against the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He has never told us to desert the world. He says, in fact, he says, engage yourself in all the work and the professions. And he says, your work is service. Your work is worship of God when you are working. So you see that how much the view of detachment is different from what we understand it. Now that I'm talking about detachment, let me go a little bit further about this, because this is a subject which we often talk about. We often talk about this. In the writings you hear more and all the time telling us that you have to be detached from the things of this world. To be detached does not mean, as I said, to become careless, to give up the world and become poor. In fact, sometimes poor people are much more attached to the world than rich people. You know, sometimes poor people are much more attached to the rich than the rich people. There is a story in Persian of a king and a dervish. Maybe you have heard that story. It's a Persian story. And the king and the dervish, the dervishes are supposed to be, now they're supposed to be renounced. They have renounced the world and they are detached, and in fact they have nothing. And they have really, that's one thing, they have nothing. And they go around and they have got a little basket. And they carry this basket around with them, so that as they go around, people would just put a little bit of food in these baskets for them. And they sleep anywhere that they come across. You see how much this is against the teachings of the faith? Although they think this is detachment. This is very much against the teachings of the faith to do this. Anyhow, it was supposed to be, this man was supposed to be so detached from the things of this world that the king became very fond of this idea. And he invited this dervish to his palace. And then they stayed together for some time there, and he taught them a lot of lessons about detachment. And the king became very, very much of a convert to this idea. And he said, well, I'll become like you. And so the king disguised himself in the garb of a dervish, left the palace, and they both of them left the palace and went on wandering. You know, just this is what they do. They wander around. And after a mile that they gone, suddenly the dervish, in horror, he found out that he has left behind his basket in the palace of the king. And he said, oh, this is terrible. We have to go back and get our basket. I can't go without it. The king said to him, look, I have left behind my palaces, and you were attached to your little miserable basket, you see? Which is true. Now you see, really, detachment has nothing to do with riches or with poverty. Although Baha'u'llah says, and so in other religions, that if you are a very rich man, it's difficult to be detached. But if you become detached when you are in a possession of wealth and other things, then your station is very high indeed. But really, detachment, again, I think I was mentioning it some time ago to the friends here. One evening we were together, and I mentioned the meaning of detachment as far as I understand it. I'll repeat it for you here. You know, every person, all of us, by nature, we are very possessive people. By nature, man is possessive. We want to possess things. We want to own things. We want to own our own things. And as you go around, you go and always add things to your collections. We are collectors. You have a house, you have a business, you have money, you want to add to it, you go out, you find something beautiful, a beautiful painting, you add to it. This is your collections. You bring it home. And we gather these things all around us. This is true, really and truly. I suppose if somebody looks down upon us from the spiritual worlds of God, who have passed from this state of attachment, they will be amazed how we are gathered things around us, you know. It's like these little creatures who store their food, you know, and they are protecting it with their lives. We are really very queer people. This is the way man is. This is the way God has created us. What can you do? This is the animal in us. We are possessive. And we are the master in this. You know, the master always stands in the middle and all our things revolve around us. We are the most important thing. And everything revolves around it. Everything beautiful you buy, you add to your collections. Until one day, you come across the faith. And you say, this is a very beautiful thing. This is the most beautiful thing I've got. And then you add it to your collections. Yes, you are in the middle, and all the things revolve around you, your house, your business, your family, your possessions, and your faith. You see? You have an hour for your hobbies, you have an hour for your family, you have so many hours for your work, and you have an hour for the faith. Well, such a man is attached to the things of this world. He is not detached. You see? He's not detached. He is attached. Because he pays the same attention to his house, or much more maybe, than to his faith. But if you put the faith in the middle of your life as a pivot, as an axis of our life, and then we and our possessions revolve around it, then you are detached. You still can keep your possessions. But the faith is first in your life. This is really a practical way of knowing what is attachment and what is detachment. And so that when the challenge comes to us, and always challenges come to the Baha'is, to arise and serve the faith. When the challenge comes to us, then we know what to give, how much of our possessions to give, how much of our time to give. And you will give all your time if necessary, because the faith is first in your life. And if I want to move my home and go to some other town, I'll find out whether the faith is going to benefit from it, or whether the faith is going to be harmed by it. And then I'll do according to what the faith needs. This is really a criterion for finding out whether one is attached or one is not attached to the things of this world. And I will mention one form of attachment, which is the most formidable and the most harmful and the most difficult maybe. It is not attachment to things. It is attachment to our own self. The ego. Attachment to our own self. This is the most dangerous form, and it will take probably a lifetime to get rid of it. A lifetime. It needs spiritual battles that we have to fight always within us to subdue the self. The self is the greatest enemy we have. And I don't want you to mix up the self of man with the soul. The self is what is the animal self. Is the force within us which drives us towards animal nature. That is the self. And we have to always be in a position to have a rein on that dangerous animal. And whenever it raises its head, just put it back in its place. This is where we have to be always in control. I will give you an example of what I mean by this, our own self. I'll give you an example of this. And I will give you an example of one of those, the local spiritual assemblies are places where we are all tested when we go into it. And when we sit there, we will be tested. That's a marvelous testing arena for Baha'is. We are tested all the time, perhaps, and we are not aware of it. Now I'll give you an example of what self means. You know, an attachment to self means we become attached to our opinions. I love my opinion. It's my views. It is my views. It's very important, you know. And I give my views. And if it is not accepted, I'll be upset. And if it is accepted, I'll be delighted. And I will go around and say, this was my idea, you know. I was mentioning yesterday, the word I and my is really a very ugly thing in the faith, in life. This is my idea. But really, a person who is selfless is a person who gives his ideas and he forgets about it. Really forgets about it now. Not to just say outwardly forget about it, but really. And so that if your idea was put forward, and if they said, what a marvelous idea it is, we are going to write to the House of Justice and say this person's ideas have been so marvelous that I don't feel, oh, great, now I'm elated and I'm exalted. This is my idea. Now, as soon as you think in your heart, that way, be sure we are attached to our own self. This is the attachment to our own self. One example of it. Or if they came back and said, this was a terrible idea. This man's ideas is horrible. Every time he comes, he gives us terrible ideas. Okay. One should not be affected by it. You just have given your ideas, you forget about it. Because in this faith, now nobody is telling us that we should suppress our views. I'm not saying that. In a local assembly, we have to give our views frankly, and if you found that your friends did not understand you, you have to give them another explanation of it and explain to them. But once you give it in, once you give your ideas, it's no longer yours. You have to forget it. This is selflessness. Now, this was just an example of what self is. This I is the self. And in this faith, Baha'u'llah in this day and age has removed from us, from our midst, anything which would compel people or make people to become, to have a position so that they will become, they will go around and throw their weight around, as they say. There is no such a thing in the faith. This is one of the great bounties of God, that Baha'u'llah has completely eradicated the idea of personalities. The great station that we have, as I said yesterday, really is that of servitude. A real servant is very great and beautiful. A real servant is the most beautiful thing, the most exalted thing we can do. And a real servant will never want him to be exalted. You know, as soon as you get him exalted, it's not nice. And I think that we have to learn these things as time goes on from the writings. I mentioned that yesterday. I'm not going to repeat it. And here we come to another one of those teachings of Baha'u'llah, which not until we carry it out can we do anything proper. And that is to love one another. To love one another. Now you see, you cannot force yourself to love somebody, can you? And it's no good to do that either. It's a worse thing. It's a bad thing to do. It's better not to do it if it is artificial. I know, we all understand this. Love must come from the heart. But it is easy to love people you like. It's not easy to love people you don't like. And we must also be practical. In all these communities, there are people who do something to you which you don't respond positively to. You feel irritated sometimes, maybe. I don't know. And that is why we come to dislike people. I'm talking to you frankly. Now, how can we love that person that you dislike or you don't like so much? And not until we are able to love him can we do anything in this life, in this faith. Nothing. You read the writings, all day, you say your prayers every day, you carry out all the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but if you don't love the friends with all your heart, you don't love each other, then things will not go forward. We become frustrated, we become unhappy, even though I read the writings every day. Now, I must make a note of some of these things that comes to my mind. Now, I will tell you an incident which happened to me some years ago. And that might explain what I'm trying to say. Some years ago, I was walking in a very crowded street in London. Very crowded. Thousands of people pass you every minute. And these people don't mean much to you because you don't even take notice of them, as if they are not there. And then suddenly, I noticed across the road, on the other side of the street, there was a man who used to come to our firesides years before. He was not a Baha'i, but he used to come to our firesides. And as soon as I saw that man, my heart jumped for him. And I said to myself, look at this crowd. None of them probably know about Baha'u'llah, but that man has heard the name of Baha'u'llah, and this is marvelous. It's the distinction. I could see the distinction. He has heard the name of Baha'u'llah many a times. He is distinguished in my sight from the rest of them who haven't heard it. To hear the name of Baha'u'llah is a great privilege, a great distinction. You see now? Now, how much more is the position of a person who says, I am a Baha'i? Can you see the station of this person? Forget about his doings. Forget about all the things he does which run against your grain and upset you. But look at what he has. He is a Baha'i. Now, when I say he is a Baha'i, what does it mean really? I can only talk about myself. Do you know, really and truly, and I mean this, I cannot say I am a Baha'i, except I'm related to him by name. It's just a name. It's just that I'm attached myself to his name. I cannot say I am a Baha'i, truly. Impossible to say that. But by name, I am attached to him. And that is a distinction. Who cares what I do and what my life is? Who is not perfect? Who is perfect? We all have our shortcomings. But this person has a trace of Baha'u'llah in him. Just a name. And that is a great distinction. You compare him with the rest of mankind, he stands far above it. Now look into his face in that way. Don't look at his problems and shortcomings that you might see, because you look into his face and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then you love him. I can assure you, you will love him because of Baha'u'llah, because of his attachment by name to him. And then you can embrace him without even knowing what his name is. Then you will never see the wrong things. And as soon as something happened that you disliked, you remember that. We are all full of shortcomings. This is a very important principle, really. And this is the meaning of humility. This is the meaning of servitude. Meaning of servitude is not to come in and bow before each other. But the meaning of servitude is to look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah. And then you love that person. And you become united with him. And then we have a sin-covering eye. I don't want to see the bad things. No, you don't want to see the bad things in me. Don't see it that way. And if, of course, somebody does something which harms the faith through his actions, which brings disgrace upon the faith, then it is our function to inform the institutions of the faith and say, look here, this person is doing something which is very bad. And then it is for the institutions of the faith to help him to overcome his problems. And if he didn't, well, they might even say to him, you can't remain in the faith. Okay, that is not for me to do that. But as an individual, we have to have a sin-covering eye and to see in every face a trace of Baha'u'llah. There definitely is. And that is what makes every person so beautiful, really. It's that which makes every person so beautiful and so distinguished. You read the writings and see what the station he has destined for a true believer. Someone who is attached by name in the sight of God. You remember what Christ said? He said, when the man came to him, his disciples, and said to him, my father is dead, can I go and bury him? He said, leave the dead to bury their dead. Means all the people in his sight who had not faith were dead. Now this is not in any way to indicate that we have to look down upon people, far from it. Go out and say, oh, you're dead, you're no good. No, far from it. When you become a Baha'i, you realize all your shortcomings. I will recognize my own shortcomings. As soon as you become a Baha'i, you can find out you're full of shortcomings. All the shortcomings come to light. Those of you who were here, I was talking about it yesterday, saying that when the lamp lights up, when the light is there, you see, when I look into this light, can I see anything bad in him? No. You can see all the light. But I'm sure if you go very close to it, if you switch it off, they're full of dust. But you won't see the dust. This is how we should look into the faces of the friends. See a little bit of Baha'u'llah, and that will overlook. You can then overlook. You won't see anything else. Really, you won't see anything else. Everybody has good qualities, marvelous qualities. And one of the things that we have to learn to do is to encourage each other. Is to encourage, the local assemblies should encourage the friends. The friends should encourage their friends. Encouragement is very important for our institutions to encourage the believers. And encouragement must be genuine. Really, if you ever come across a friend, a Baha'i who is disenchanted or who is not coming to the meetings or has got some problem, be sure that what has happened is that no one has encouraged him. He needs encouragement. I'll give you an example, a story of this. And this is a very beautiful story I heard from one of our auxiliary board members in Britain. This woman is a teacher. And she teaches difficult children. All the rebellious type children are brought to her class. You know, children who nobody can manage them. When they come in, they really disturb everything. And she is in charge of this. In big schools, there is a problem. Often you come across children who no teacher can handle. Well, she tells us how she works with them. She said, I must find something good in them and then encourage them. That's the only way, he said, I can harness them. This is a very, very wise thing. This is how the faith has grown also. This is how Shoghi Effendi always, and Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha encouraged something. They saw something in you which was good. And that thing they elaborated on and encouraged it. Because encouragement must be genuine. You cannot go and falsely encourage somebody and say, oh, what a wonderful person, what wonderful things you have done, without meaning it. You have to find something in that person. And she said one day, this woman told us, she said one day, a little boy was brought into my class who was a most difficult child. And he was disturbing so much that the whole class was disturbed, the whole day. And she said, I looked at him, I tried to find out what good quality I can find in him, and I couldn't. There was no good quality that she could find to praise him or to help him, to encourage him. I remember I said to him, well, couldn't you do something? Well, send him out of this school, out of the room for a while, if he's disturbing everybody. Oh, she said, if I do that, my relationship is ruined. It's no use. I cannot do that. I must find something. And she said, when we were sitting after a while, I noticed that, all the children in school, most of them, when they sit, they stoop over their desk, they just sit down like this. They stoop and they are bending more or less. But she said, I saw that this fellow Billy is sitting straight. Now that was good enough to start him. So she said, she announced to the whole class, she said, I want all of you to look at Billy. You see how marvelous he is, how straight he sits? Now I want you all to sit like Billy. Now Billy had never heard anybody praising him. And now his eyes opened and he began to look around. He saw he became the center of attraction. Everybody looked at him. Everybody sat straight. Now, Billy becomes excited. He sits there. And he is no longer going to be difficulty. And all the children, every session when they come in, the teacher reminds them, now don't forget, you all have to sit like Billy. And what Billy does, he is so excited about it, because everything he has been doing, everybody has been attacking him more or less, of all the wrong things he's doing. Now he's going to do something else which is going to be good, so that the teacher might encourage him again. You see, this is a marvelous lesson. This is what our institutions really are doing, and will be doing, and should be doing really. And ourselves. And I think that encouragement, I'm sure some of the believers who are discouraged and who are left alone, if you find them, anybody like that, if you find what good qualities they have and try to encourage that good quality and say to them that you can serve the faith in that way through this particular ability that you have that nobody else has, we will become excited and they'll come close to us. Now, as I mentioned, this question of loving each other and not trying to judge one another is very important. Because Shoghi Effendi, in one of his writings, he mentions this. He mentions that the function of the individual in relation to another individual is to love each other and to be compassionate and to be loving, but not to judge. Whereas he says the function of the institutions of the faith, the function of the local assemblies and the national assembly, is to apply justice. And when you apply justice, you cannot become compassionate. And Shoghi Effendi says at the present time it's the reverse. The individual Baha'is, when they come together, they judge each other and they act towards each other as if one is a local assembly, judging the other person and criticizing. And the local assemblies, when it comes to give, or the national assemblies, when they come to apply justice, they become compassionate. Every Baha'i has marvelous qualities, and we have to look into their faces and see those qualities of Baha'u'llah. I'll tell you another story, just to give you this. You know that sometimes there are difficulties in Baha'i communities, and there was a community in Europe, a Baha'i community, which had great personal problems, personality problems. You can never solve personality problems by expedient measures. You cannot solve them by expedient measures. And the only way you can really do it is to shower everyone with love. And anyhow, in my function, I was asked to go and see if I can help them. Well, there was a big file, which if I show you the size of it, it was as big as this, about this community, of all the problems they had with each other. Some of them even wouldn't talk to each other. If they saw each other in the streets, they would avoid each other. It was a terrible situation. And they said that it was obvious from reading these files. I decided not to read them, and at the end I decided it's no good to read them. But I knew there was one man who they said he was the culprit. He was the responsible man. He really was the man who has created all this terrible entanglement and problems. for years. And people had gone there, national assemblies, members, all kinds of people, board members, gone there to try to solve it, and it became always worse, to such an extent that these people had great prejudices against the institutions of the faith. It became very difficult. Well, I went along and I met with these people, not that man who was all the cause of the difficulties, but I met with all the others, and I found that they were beautiful Baha'is. Really and truly. They were just beautiful Baha'is. You couldn't see anything bad in them. Oh, marvelous. And we talked about it individually with everybody. And then I was afraid to go and see that man. I had to go and see him anyhow. That was the problem. And I reached almost to the door of this house. Before I ring the bell, it suddenly occurred to me very clearly that I am going there with the wrong feelings. Because I've read some of these files, it's no good. And I knew that this man must have marvelous qualities. Now, this story of disagreement, the story of this community is such that for years and years and years, this has been going on. And it could not be resolved. And this man was obviously the source of all the problem. I have no doubt about it. This was in this file. You could see that. But I decided immediately, before I rang the bell, to really purify my motive. I couldn't go like this. That he has some good qualities. Of course he has. He must have. He's a Baha'i. After all, he is a Baha'i. That's great. That's good enough. So with that feeling, I rang the bell. Now, I can tell you that he and his wife were sitting there waiting for 2 or 3 days, trembling with fear of they're going to see the angel of death, or is that what you call it? When he comes. They were frightened of what's going to happen now, Well, when I looked at this face of this woman, I just looked at it just as I'm looking at your faces, and this woman almost melted. And she went running to her husband. I could hear whispering, saying to her that he's not that bad, He's not that bad at all, but we were thinking about it. Anyhow, this man came, and we sat down, and we embraced each other, and we sat down. And I thought, what a wonderful thing it is to meet another Baha'i. And we talked about our experiences in the faith, of his services, what he has been. And we talked and talked about all the stories. We became so heated up with excitement. And he went in and he showed me all the years and years of service this man had. Of all the photographs of the friends in the old countries, in other countries that he has been, in other things he'd done. A very learned person he was, and we talked about the faith. We went into all some of the abstruse writings of Baha'u'llah, and he said something and I said something, and it took 3 hours. We were discussing these things. We became so much enthused. And then at the end of it, I thought, now I better say nothing about his problems. And I said, well, now I better go. I decided I'll leave it for some other time. I'll come back again tomorrow. And I was going to go. And do you know what he did? He grabbed me. He said, all of this problem in this town is my fault. He said, everything is my fault. I hadn't said a word. He said, I want you to do something. He said, I want you to accompany me to go to the houses of the believers. Now, these are the people he wouldn't talk to. He wouldn't see them. He wouldn't ever. And he said, I want to prostrate myself at their feet and beg forgiveness. I hadn't said anything to him. We never entered the subject. And we did that. He came along. We went up. We knocked on the doors, and people were startled to see him coming to the door of his house. And he literally, he prostrated himself. He cried and cried and cried. And the others cried and cried and cried. And then we went to somebody else's house, and the same thing happened. And in the evening we gathered all the friends together after 2 or 3 years. And it was a crying meeting all the time. They were crying. And ever since they felt so united, so happy. And then the faith grew in that town. Local people became Baha'is. Now you see, and we never said a word about what this man had done. We have to really genuinely, in our approach to people, is to see a trace of Baha'u'llah in every soul, in every face. All problems will vanish, I can assure you. This is how the faith works. This is the power that He has released for us. God, He has released this tremendous power. And this power is not for me or for you or for him. This power is for everybody. There is no exclusiveness here. Every one of us can draw from this power. Every one of us can attract Him to ourselves. Well, we were talking about something different. You remember we were saying that to read the writings and to say our obligatory prayers is not sufficient unless we carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah, obey his laws, and then to love one another. It's one of the most important teachings. And if we love one another, everything else will work out. And don't force yourself to love, but try to love. Try to see if there is any problem somewhere, to approach it in this way, that we all have to go from this life. You know this. We're not going to be here always. Every one of us will have to go. And this is not a place to enter into. These years that we are living here is not a place that we should try to judge each other and say, oh, this person is so irritating to me, or that person is so difficult. Now, here is where we have to turn to the writings and see what are the teachings of Baha'u'llah and do it for his love. He says, carry out my commandments. I'm paraphrasing the words of Baha'u'llah. Carry out my commandments for the love of my beauty. We do not carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah because it's good for us. This is a very important point to remember. We don't carry out the teachings because, if I carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah, I am going to be wise, I'm going to be a good man, I'm going to be a very knowledgeable man. This is not the real motive again. Although at first when you become a Baha'i, naturally you see the teachings and you say it's marvelous to become adorned with all these characteristics and beautiful things that the faith has. But when you become a deeper Baha'i, you realize that you do obey the teachings of Baha'u'llah for the love of Baha'u'llah. This is a marvelous motive because you love him. Again, remember, when you love somebody, go back to nature, go back to life. When you love somebody, and you really love somebody, and I'm talking of real love, 100% love, when you really love somebody, you will not question what your beloved wants. You just do it because you love that person. You see? This is the real motive, the real relationship. Although, when you carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah for the love of him, yes, all those things will be yours. You will become knowledgeable, you will become wise, you will become deep, you will acquire all those qualities, but you acquire it not because you wanted it at first, for yourself, for the satisfaction of yourself, but you've done it because you love him. Just as much as when your beloved asks you something in your life, whom you love very much, when he asks for something or she asks for something, you do it because of him or because of her. This is a good motive. This is a real love. Today, Shoghi Effendi has told us, Baha'u'llah has told us, Abdul Baha has told us that not until we live the life in accordance with the teachings can our work of teaching become successful. This is another thing which is very important to bear in mind. Some of you have remembered that celebrated passage from Shoghi Effendi, which I haven't got it with me to read it for you, but I'm sure many of you who are familiar with it, this is a celebrated passage when he says, not by the force of numbers. Not by the force of numbers, not by a mere disposition of teachings, and not by an organized campaign of teaching, can you influence the people who are not Baha'is and bring them into the faith. I'm paraphrasing his ideas. He says, one thing and one thing alone. One thing and one thing alone. See how much emphasis he puts on it? And there is no other alternative. One thing and one thing alone, he says, which will bring people to the faith, is that each one of us act as mirrors. Mirrors. And we are always acting as mirrors, you know that. Every human being is a mirror of what is inside him. But he says we should act as mirrors which will project and reflect the teachings of Baha'u'llah in its purity, in its pure form. He says then it'll influence others. And there are many stories, I'm sure you have heard many stories of such beautiful Baha'is who had lived this life in this way. And as they walk in the streets, they have been the center to which people turn to. Remember, Martha Ruth was one such person. I mean, wherever she went, people were attracted to her. I mean, this is part of our history. And this is not something that she was a very special human being. She was a human being. But she had an absolute connection with Baha'u'llah. She was connected fully to him. This is what happened. And therefore she became a perfect mirror. What was in her heart reflected out in her face. And people saw that radiance and they were attracted to it. This is the way. And this is what Shoghi Effendi tells us. And this is why I said that the forces are all over the world preparing us. We can bring great numbers into the faith if we do these things. And I'm sure that your community has been really in the forefront of teaching activities. We have to learn from you. Forgive me for saying these things. Your community has been so successful in teaching. At one stage, I remember they would say that 1% of the people of this country are Baha'is. And whenever we talk about Alaska, it rings such a marvelous community. And now I can say it is. It really is. It's a very beautiful community. You cannot see yourselves because you're sitting there. But I can see this. It's marvelous. And this is not because of us. This is because of Baha'u'llah. He has given us all this marvelous powers. Now, time is coming, Mr. Chairman, to have a little break. When is your break? Now? I want to tell you now, having said all of this so far, we have talked about growing our faith. Our faith grows. We want our faith to grow. And we talked about it yesterday in great detail of the things we have to do. Not that I've said this, but what Baha'u'llah has said. Reading the writings and saying the obligatory prayers. And now we said about living the life. Living the life. But there is one thing. That if we don't do it, really and really, this is real serious. If we don't do it, all these things will not be of any use. Even living the life would not bring up the results. And I will explain to you what it is next session. So,